Today's daf is daf Lamed Gimel, and we'll start at the end of the third line. Abaye misader hoya misader marocha mishmei de
With
Gemara.
your with your rishus. May the learning today be for refuah for all the ptsuim.
Thank you very much. I've been a little bit out of it. Yesterday was a very heavy day. So Abaye is now presenting the daily schedule, the chronology of the avodos in the Migdash on a daily basis. And he had a Kabbalah from, generations before that. And he is going to reflect the sheet of Abba Shol. Now let's just review what Abba Shol's opinion was, and the Chachamim dissented. Abai accepted Abba Shol. And this is a sugya that you may recall back on Daf Yud Dalet. Both, and this is unanimously accepted, both the Chachamim and Abba Shol accepted one fundamental principle, and that is that with regard to the Hatovas HaNeros, and there are 7 Neros, there's going to be 5 and then 2 with a hefsek in the middle. That we all know. The machlokus is what exactly is that hefsek? What comes in between the first 5 and the last 2 Neros? Chachamim are of the opinion that it's the Ketores that has to be brought before the last 2 Neros. And that's the hefsek that interrupts between the first 5 and the last 2. Abba Shol is of the opinion that the Avodas HaTamid will come in between the first 5 and the last 2, and the Ketores will only be brought after the completion of Hatovas HaNeros with the last 2 Neros. So that according to Chachamim, it's going to be Hatovas Chamesh Neros, then it's going to be Haktoras Haktores, then Hatovas Shtei Neros. According to Abba Shol, it'll be Hatovas Chamesh Neros, Dam Hatomid, Avodas Hatomid, Hatovas Shtei Neros, and then Haktoras Haktores. So that Abaye's sequence, as we'll soon see, reflects the sheet of Abba Shol. Now, what's the first thing that we have to take care of with the beginning of the day is Marocha Gdol. So we're talking about, on the Mizbeach, there were 2 Marochos. There's one Marocha called the Marocha Gdola, and we're talking about the Mizbeach HaChitzon. And then we'll see on one particular side of the Mizbeach, towards the corner, there was a Marocha Ketana. And that was for the purpose of the Ketores, as we'll see. But first of all, we start with Marocha Gdol, and we set up the logs of wood on the Mizbeach HaChitzon in order to be makriv the Evarim, the Emurim of all the Karbanos. Kodemes, that comes first, and what comes second? Le Marocha Shnia Shel Ketores. On the Mizbeach, there was a second Marocha in which they burnt the Eitzim, and then that created Gecholim, coals, and those coals were taken inside the Heichal to the Mizbeach HaPnimi, both in the morning and in the evening, for the purpose of Haktoras Haktoras. So we start with the Marocha Gdola, and we set up the Eitzim. Then we go to the Marocha Ketana and set up the Eitzim. And the Marocha Ketana, he tells you here exactly where it was located. He says that this Marocha Ketana, otherwise known as Marocha Shnia, was close to the Keren Maravis Dromis, the southwestern corner of the Mizbeach, but it was 4 amos towards the north. And this is all reflecting a Mishnah in Masechet Ton. Next. Maracha Shnia Shel Ktores Kodeves L'Sidur Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. The Torah commands us in Vayikra Vav Ubir Aleh Kohen Eitzim, and on the Maracha Gdola, in addition to the regular logs that would be used to produce the flame, they had to add Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. And that's going to be next on the list. So we started Maracha Gdola, we went to the Maracha Shnia, and now we're going back to the Maracha Gdola, and we're adding Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, 2 blocks of wood. Either get Shnei Gizrei Eitzim code. What's next? Dishon. Dishon means to clear out the ashes. Which Mizbeach are we talking about? Mizbeach HaPnimi. Because every day, twice a day, they brought the Ketores on the inner Mizbeach, the Mizbeach HaZav in the Heichal. And now we're ready for Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi. They would clean out all the ashes that were left from the burning of the Ketores of the previous day. Next, Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi Kodem LaTovas Chamesh Neros. Okay, now we're going to get to Abba Shaul Shita. We're going to start with Hatovas Chamesh Neros. Hatovas Chamesh Neros Kodem. What comes next? Lidam HaTomid. Okay, Dam HaTomid means the Shchita culminating with the Zrikas Hadam of the Tomid. This is the sheet of Abba Shaul. And Dam HaTomid Kodem, what comes next? Hatovas Shtei Neros. So we're going to complete the entire process of Hatovas Neros with that interruption, that hefsek in the middle for the Avodas HaTomid. And now, and only now, are we ready for the Ketores. Hatovas Shtei Neros Kodem Liktores. And the Ketores was burnt on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. And this is the sheet of Abba Shaul that Ketores comes after Neros. The Chacham didn't accept that. According to Chachamim, Abai is not reflecting the Chacham sheet, but they require Ketores before Hatovas HaNeros. They're going to start the process of Hatovas HaNeros before the Ketores. And that's because we need an interruption during Hatovas HaNeros. But fundamentally, the Ketores that's being brought between the first 5 and the second set of 2 Neros is prior to Hatovas HaNeros, according to Chacham. But we're now reflecting the Shita of Abba Shaul. Okay, what's after the Ketores? Now we began the Avodas Dam of the Talmud, excuse me, as the interruption between 5 and 2. But now we have to do the Haktorah of the Eivarim. Is the Ketores Kodem Le'Haktoras Eivarim? Okay, so now we're ready to complete the main part of the Talmud, the covered Talmud, and that is the Haktoras HaEvarim. Next, Lemincha. Now we're ready for the Nesachim. Every Korban Ola has to be accompanied by Nesachim. The Nesachim are made up of 2 basic elements. Element number 1 is Asiris HaEfa of Soles. So we have refined wheat flour, and it's got to be 1/10 of an ephah. And the second part of the Nesachim are the Niskei Yayin, which is 1/4 of a hin of Yayin that has to be poured on this bed. But we're not ready for that. Why? Because Mincha Lechavitin, immediately after the Mincha, before we conclude the Nesachim of the Mincha with the Yayin, first we have to take the Chavitin. And the Chavitim is what we call the carbon of the Kohen Gadol, the carbon mincha of the Kohen Gadol, which was made of Asir Seifa that was split into 2, half in the morning and half in the afternoon. And again, the Gemara is going to derive all these from Psukim. And Chavitim Polin and Sachem. Now we're ready for the Revius Hahin Yayin that is poured on the Mizbeach as a completion of the Nesachim. So it's very interesting because the Chavitim that we're talking about, that's the private individual obligation of the Kohen Gadol. and yet it wedges in the middle of that mincha that has to be accompanied the carbon tamid. The carbon tamid belongs to the entire tzibur of Klal Yisrael. We're going to begin with the dam, and then we go on to the Aktar Seivarim, and now we're up to the Nesachim, to the mincha, and we're not yet ready for the yayin, because in between the mincha and the solace and the yayin, we're gonna wedge in the chavit. What comes after the Nesachim? So now it became Shabbos. Until now it wasn't Shabbos. Now it's Shabbos. On Shabbos, we have two unique dimensions of the Avodas HaMikdash. We have, number one, the Musaf, and number two, the Lechem HaPanim. So immediately after the Ola, meaning the Tamid, is complete, we've already done not only the Mincha, but also the Nesachim. So that's it, finito. We're finished with the Tamid, and now we're ready for the Karban Musaf of Shabbos. That's going to take place at around 11 a.m. or around close to noon on Shabbos. Now, within the context of the Lechem HaPanim, there was something called the B'zichin, otherwise known as Levona, and on each side of the Shulchan in the Heichal, there were 6 lechamim piled up, one on top of the other on shelves, and on each maracha of 6 lechamim of the Lechem HaPanim, there was a spoonful of levona, which is translated to English, if I'm not mistaken, as frankincense, one of the elements that was used in the Ketores. And that levona in the Bazichin had to be burnt on the Mizbeach. There was Haktara, the Bazichin, and at what point are we going to do the Haktara of the Bazichin, of the Levona? Is after we bring the Musaf. Then we're ready for the Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim. Bazichin, Kodmin LeTamid Shel Bein Arbaim. Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim is the very last avoda of the day. And here, Abai quotes a pasuk, Shenemar Vayikra Vav Viktir Olea Chelvei Hashlamim. What is Hashlamim referencing to? The word Hashlamim is used figuratively to refer to Hashlama. Hashlama means to conclude something, to perfect and complete it. So the completion is going to be with the Haktara of the Levona. And after the Haktara Levona, we're ready for the Olas Tamid Shel Bein Arbayim. And we darshan the word Oleha. Oleha means Al Olas HaTamid Shel Shachar. So we have the Olas HaTamid, and now we're ready for the Olas HaTamid Shel Bein Arbayim. And Hashlem, the pasuk says, Hashlamim means Hashlem, complete the karbanos of the day, kol karbanos kulam, by bringing the Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim. So if I test you, what is the first karban of the day? You'll answer me the Tamid Shel Shachar. If I test you, quiz you, what is the last karban of the day? It's the Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim. Omar Mar, we learned in the words of Abaye that Maracha Gdola Kodevetz LaMaracha Shniyah Shel Ketores Minolan. This Sanya we learned in a Brisa. And we're going to derive from a pasuk at the beginning of the 6th chapter of Vayikra, Hi Ha'olah Al Mokdah Al Mizbeach Al Laila. And Mokdah means the pyre, Pyre, that's the flame, is Mokdah Zu Maracha Gdola. And then it says, the Eish HaMizbeach Tukad Bo. What is that referring to? You just told me Al Mokdah. And that's Maracha Shniyah Shel Ketores. And that tells you that there's first the Maracha Rishona, Maracha Gdola, and then the Maracha Shniyah. The Gemara says, V'yepach hano. Now it's true that there are 2 marachos here indicated by the pasuk. There's one Olal Mokdah at the beginning of the pasuk, and then there's the Eish Hamizbeach Tukad Bo in the safe of the post. But how do you know which one refers to which of the two marachos? Maracha Gedola, Maracha Shnia. Epoch, I know, why not switch it around in the order? Mistaba, the Gemara says it's compelling to assume that Maracha Gedola Adifa Shekain Kaparasa Meruba, because the kapara power of the main fire is to burn all the carbonates, with one exception, only the Torres. It's only the Torres that needs its own Maracha. And therefore, since the kapara Meruba of the Maracha Gedola, it makes sense that that should come first. Gemara says, Adarab Maracha Shnia Adifa. You know what? If you ask me, says the Gemara, I would put the Maracha Shnia on a higher level than Maracha Rishon. Why? After all, the gechalim, those coals from the burnt wood on the Maracha Ketana, are brought inside the heichal, inside the Beis HaMikdash itself. More answers, afilu hachi kaparasa meruba difa. I still think that the location in terms of Makom Kodesh is less important than the power of kapara. The scope of the kapara is what determines which comes first, and therefore the Maracha Gedola comes first. Ibai Sema, another answer to your question, to explain why the Maracha Gedola comes first. Ilo mishkach eitzim lo Maracha Shnia milo ma'ayel. Maracha Gedola. In other words, if, let's say, in a scenario where we cannot find eitzim are re'uyim because there are many different psulim in eitzim, like, for example, if they are wormy, so we couldn't find eitzim, and we cannot set up the Maracha Shnia. Milo ma'ayel, Maracha Gedola. How are we going to bring the Torres if the Maracha Shnia is empty and there are no coals that have been burnt on the Maracha Shnia because they ran out of trees and logs? The answer is we'll take the logs and the gecholim that were created from these logs, and we'll use them on the Mizbeach HaPnimi to burn the Ketores. So you see that Yesh B'chal Masayimona, the Maracha Gedola, encompasses within it the status of a Maracha Ketana as well. And if need be, then we will take the Gecholim from the Maracha Gedola for the Haktoras Bifnim on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. Abai continues. Maracha Shniya Shel Ketores Kodeves L'Sidu Shnei Gizrei Eitzim Inolan. How do we derive this halacha? The Torah says there at the beginning of Perek Vav in Sefer Vayikra, with regard to the Maracha Gedola, it says Ubir Oleh HaKohen Eitzim Baboker. And this teaches us that the Kohen has to add Shnei Gizrei Eitzim on the Maracha Gedola. And why does it say Ubir Oleh, which seems to imply that only on the Maracha Gedola do we place the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, v'lo al Chaverta, but as far as the Maracha Shnia, the smaller Maracha for the Ketores, I don't know that there's a requirement of Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. So the Gemara says, Michlal de Isa lechaverta, from the fact that the Torah says that you should organize the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim on the Maracha Gedola, and there already is a Maracha Shnia, and you could be Mesader a Shnei Gizrei Eitzim on the Maracha Shnia. Why did the Torah have to exclude that he should not be Mesader Eitzim? It must be that the Torah is trying to tell us that the Maracha Shnia Shel Ketores comes before the Seder Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. So the Gemara says you're going to derive that from the pasuk Oleha v'hai Oleh mi boile legufe. I need Oleha for the din itself to teach us that you have to set up the Eitzim on the Maracha and directly on the Maracha, not on the side, not in its own pile. And that's all Oleha. Oleha means on the Maracha itself. Therefore, you don't have the luxury of using the word Oleha to teach me that the Maracha Shnia comes before the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. And the Gemara says, Trei Oleha Ksiv. that the Torah repeats the word aleh twice. Once it says ubi aleh kohen eitzim baboker baboker ve'arach aleh ola, and that we need legufo to teach me that you put the eitzim on the marach itself, not on the side. Vasheni, and then there's another time where it says aleha, because not only you bir aleha, it also says v'yarach aleha ha'ola, and that's going to teach me that the marach hashniya comes before the shnei gizrei eitzim. Abai continues, Sidur shnei gizrei eitzim kodem l'dishon mizbeach hapnimi. So the Gemara explains, with regard to Sidur Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, Ksiv Baboker. Okay, that gives you Kedima when it says twice Baboker, but Behacha, similarly, with regard to the Dichin of Mizbeach HaPnimi, Ksiv Baboker, they also have this double language of Baboker, implying that it has to be earlier. So how do you know what comes first? The Dichin Mizbeach HaPnimi, or the Shnei Gizrei, Sidur Shnei Gizrei Eitzim? More answers, Hafilu Hachi Machshir Odif. The status of the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim is that of a Machshir. The Dishin Mizbeach is just to remove that which was there from yesterday. But placing the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, that's for the purpose of a Machshir, to set up the hakrova on the mizbeach. Is yesh lahakdim es sidur ha'etzim l'dishon mizbeach kevon shemachshirim es haktos hareim notlim gecholim lahaktir es haktores. So that this is what we need. The Gemara says the following: what do you mean machshir? You're talking about a machshir. Mind you, where's the machshir? Shnei Gizrei Eitzim? Va'amrit, you just told me that Shnei Gizrei Eitzim l'marocha gedola azli. That we are dedicating the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim for the marocha gedola, and we're putting all of these eitzim on the marocha gedola. As far as the Ketores is concerned, we're going to take the Gecholim from the Marocha Shniya. And therefore, what are you talking about when you talk about a Machshir here? Are you telling me that the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim is a Machshir for the Ketores? That can't be. In order to get the Gecholim for the Ketores, we're not going to take it from the Marocha Gedola where we put the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. We're going to take it from the Marocha Shniya. So why do you make a big deal about the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim and give it Kedima first dibs above the Dishon of the Mizbeach HaPnimi? And you're telling me because it's a Machshir, you're getting me all confused. Because the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim is on the Marocha Gedola. And the Gecholim for the Ketores is taken from the Marocha Shniya. So how can you tell me that the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, which are being placed on the Marocha Gedola, is a machshir for the Ketores? That's not true. Rabbi Yirmiyah answers that Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, even though they weren't there for the purpose of the Ketores, nevertheless, Shum Eitzim. We have a concept of Eitzim, whether it's the Eitzim that you put on the Marocha Gedola or on the Marocha Shniya, it matters not. There's a mitzvah of Sidur Eitzim. And within that broader context of Sidur Eitzim, we're going to give Kedima to the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim before the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi, because in the case of the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, which are on the Marocha, they belong to a larger set of Eitzim, and included in that larger set are the Eitzim that produce the Gecholim on the Marocha Shniya. Ravina Omer gives the second answer. Hoil v'hischiel b'marocha. Once he started organizing the Eish, the Marocha of the Mizbeach HaChitzon, Gomer, let him complete that avoda. He's going to organize the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim as a continuation of Seder Marocha. And that all has to come before the Dishon HaMizbeach. Rav Ashi Omar. Rav Ashi gives another answer to this question. And the reasoning for Shnei Gizri Eitzim coming before is because they're machshirim, as we said before. You'll tell me, but the Ketores was taking the Gecholim for the Marocha Shnia and the Gizri Eitzim were on the Marocha Gedola. That's not a question because Ilo Mishkach Eitzim Marocha Shnia, Milo Yael, Mimarocha Rishon Gedola. As we saw earlier in this sugya, on this Omud, the law is that if there's no Eitzim on the Marocha Shnia and they cannot produce Gecholim for the purpose of the Ketores, they'll take the Gecholim from the Marocha Gedola. Abai continues, V'dichun mizbeach hapnimi kodem latovas chamesh neros. Before we get to Tovas HaNeros, we go into the Heichal and leave out the menorah. First, we're going to clear out all the Efer from the Mizbeach Hazor. My timer, Omer Abaye, Mara Gemira, this is what I was taught. This was the transmission of the Torah. Svara lo yadana. I can't tell you how we derive this halacha and this conclusion that when he enters into the Heichal, first he starts with the Dichon and the Mitzvah, and then he goes over to the candelabra, to the menorah. Rav Amar says, Rav, no. There's a real compelling logic to justify why the Dishun has to come before the Hatova of Chamesh Neros, and that's Kirei Shlokish. Yomer Reish Shlokish ein mavirin al ha-mitzvos. That if you have a mitzvah in front of you, you should not push off that mitzvah for the sake of being misasek in a different mitzvah, but rather you should be mekayim the mitzvah that is now bal liyodcha. Now, what we're going to explain in the next Gemara is why is it that the bal liyodcha here is the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi rather than the Adlaka of the menorah?